The Duke of Ravenshire had survived tension, political betrayal, and a marriage that ended in scandal. But nothing in his carefully controlled life prepared him for the sight of a woman bleeding into Christmas Eve snow, whispering his name with her dying breath. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We did love to hear from you. If you enjoy Victorian-era tale stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. England, December 1841, Christmas Eve. Geoff Coleman, Duke of Ravenshire, had two ironclad principles for surviving life after scandal. First, emotion was a liability, not a virtue. Second, never involve oneself in situations that invited speculation, gossip, or the faintest whiff of impropriety. On the evening of December 24th, 1841, he obliterated both. The Clerkenwell Winter Fair sprawled across the market square like a fever dream of festive excess. Garlands of holly and ivy twisted between lampposts. Vendors called out in competing choruses, hawking everything from roasted chestnuts to hand-carved nativity scenes, and the air hung thick with wood smoke, cinnamon, and the sweet char of candied apples. Fresh snow blanketed the cobblestones, muffling footsteps and carriage wheels, transforming London into something almost magical, provided one ignored the slush, the crushing crowds, and the distinct aroma of wet wool and horse that no amount of pine boughs could disguise. Geoff had come under protest. His aunt, the relentless Lady Cordelia Ashworth, had appeared at Ravenshire House that morning with the subtlety of an invading army. "You will not spend another Christmas entombed in that study like some Gothic recluse," she'd announced, stripping the correspondence from his hands. 1 hour. Show your face. Purchase something charitable. Pretend, if only briefly, that you remember how to be human. He'd lasted 32 minutes. Geoff stood before a stall selling embroidered handkerchiefs, debating whether Cordelia would prefer lavender or rose-patterned silk. A pointless exercise, as she'd inevitably declare whichever he chose perfectly dreadful when he heard it. Not a scream. Something worse. A soft, breathless gasp. The kind of sound a body makes when it's already surrendering. He turned sharply, scanning the crowd. That's when he saw her. She stood 20 paces away, half hidden behind a row of shuttered stalls, where the crowd thinned and the lantern light barely reached. Her crimson cloak, rich, expensive velvet, stood out against the snow like a wound. But it was her face that seized him, pale as marble, eyes wide and unfocused, mouth parted in silent distress. Their eyes met for one impossible second. Then she fell. Not gracefully, not slowly. She simply collapsed, as though every bone in her body had dissolved at once. Geoff moved without thought. He shoved past a family arguing over gingerbread, nearly upended a cart of wooden toys, his boots slipping on ice-slicked stone as he lunged toward her. What followed was perhaps the least dignified moment in the Duke of Ravenshire's carefully curated public life. The woman was tall, taller than he'd estimated, and gravity proved a far less cooperative partner than propriety manuals suggested. As Geoff caught her, her weight pitched forward with alarming momentum. Her gloved hand struck his shoulder, fingers clawing for purchase, while her head lolled sideways, dark hair tumbling loose from its pins in a cascade of silk that caught on his coat buttons. "Steady! No, not... Damn!" Geoff grunted, trying to brace her against his chest, while simultaneously preventing them both from crashing into a tower of stacked crates. His heel caught on uneven cobblestone. They lurched left. The woman's temple brushed his jaw, her breath warm and shallow against his throat. And that's when he saw it. Injury. Dark, wet, spreading across the snow beneath her skirts like ink through water. Her cloak had fallen open. Beneath it, her traveling dress, dove gray, well-tailored, was soaked through along her left side, the fabric clinging to her ribs in a grotesque bloom of crimson. Jeff's heart stopped. Christ! He dropped to one knee, cradling her against him, his hand instinctively pressing against the wound. Warm, wet, too much visible injuries. "Someone fetch a physician!" His voice cracked through the square like a whip. "Now!" The woman's eyes fluttered open, just barely. Dark eyes. Impossibly dark, even in the dim light. They focused on his face with an intensity that defied her condition. Her lips moved. Jeff leaned closer, his ear nearly touching her mouth. "Knew you'd come," she whispered. Her voice was thread-thin, each word an effort. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Then her hand, trembling, lifted toward his face and went limp. She was unconscious. Jeff knelt there in the snow, a bleeding stranger cradled in his arms, her injuries soaking through his gloves, her words echoing in his skull like a curse. "Knew you'd come." She'd been waiting for him. Around them, the fair continued. Laughter, music, the mindless cheer of Christmas Eve. But Jeff heard none of it. He stared down at the woman's face, delicate, haunted, utterly unknown, and felt the full weight of certainty settle over him like a noose. His life, as he'd so carefully reconstructed it, had just shattered, and he didn't even know her name. But perhaps that was fitting. After all, Jeff Coleman had spent the last 6 years ensuring no one truly knew him, either. The carriage ride to Ravenshire House passed in a blur of snow and silence. Jeff sat rigid against the velvet squabs, the unconscious woman arranged across the seat opposite, her head pillowed on his folded greatcoat. Visible injuries had seeped through the makeshift bandaging, his cravat sacrificed without hesitation and now stained the carriage floor in dark accusatory pools. Her breathing came shallow and quick, each exhale a small, pained sound that drove straight through his composure. He should have taken her to a hospital, to the authorities, anywhere but his private residence. Instead, he'd barked orders at his coachman and committed what society would undoubtedly label abduction. The woman stirred once during the journey, her lips forming soundless words. Jeff leaned forward instinctively, straining to hear. But she subsided back into unconsciousness, leaving only questions suspended in the cold air between them. Ravenshire House materialized through the snowfall like a fortress. Jeff carried the woman himself up the front steps, ignoring his butler's wide-eyed shock. "Fetch Mrs. Holloway, immediately, and send for Dr. Ashfield. Tell him it's urgent, not negotiable." Within minutes, his housekeeper appeared at the guest bedroom door, candle in hand, her expression shifting from concern to sharp assessment in the span of a heartbeat. Mrs. Holloway had served the Coleman family for 30 years. She'd nursed Jeff through childhood fevers and adolescent stupidity. Very little surprised her. The injured-soaked stranger in her master's arms apparently qualified as an exception. Dear God! She set the candle down with decisive efficiency. "Put her on the bed. Gently, Your Grace. I'll need hot water, clean linens, and your absence. I'm staying." "You most certainly are not, Mrs. Holloway." Jeff's voice dropped to something immovable. "I'm staying." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "As you wish." Dr. Ashfield arrived 20 minutes later, a compact man with steady hands and discretion honed by decades treating aristocratic indiscretions. He worked in methodical silence while Jeff stood sentinel by the window, pretending he wasn't watching every movement reflected in the darkened glass. Finally, Ashfield straightened, wiping his hands on a cloth. "The wound is clean, precisely placed between the ribs, designed to incapacitate, not take her life. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Meaning this wasn't a robbery gone wrong, Your Grace. This was deliberate. The physician's gaze sharpened. Someone wanted her wounded, not dead. The question is why. Jeff's jaw tightened. Will she recover? If infection doesn't set in, yes. She'll need rest, monitoring. Several days at minimum. Ashfield paused. You understand the risk you're taking, keeping her here. An unidentified woman, injured under suspicious circumstances. She stays. The words came without hesitation. After the physician departed, after Mrs. Holloway withdrew with promises to return at first light, Jeff found himself alone with the stranger. She lay motionless against white pillows, her dark hair spread like spilled ink across the linen. Fever had brought color to her cheeks, a flush that made her seem almost alive despite her stillness. Her hand rested atop the coverlet, pale and elegant. Without thinking, Jeff reached out. Her fingers closed around his, a reflexive grip, desperate even in unconsciousness. He should pull away, should leave, should do any number of sensible things. Instead, Jeff Coleman, Duke of Ravenshire, drew a chair beside the bed and settled in to wait. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the world beyond Ravenshire House into irrelevance. Inside, in the amber glow of firelight, a duke who'd sworn never to let emotion override reason watched a bleeding stranger sleep and realized, with quiet, terrible certainty, that he had no intention of letting her go. She woke to firelight and the scent of lavender. For several heartbeats, Michelle Fraser remained perfectly still, cataloging sensations with the careful precision of someone accustomed to waking in unfamiliar places. Soft sheets, clean bandaging tight across her ribs, the weight of a thick quilt. No immediate threat. Then memory crashed back. Snow, visible injury, falling, and she jerked upright. Pain lanced through her side. She gasped, pressing a hand to the wound. Easy. A man's voice, low and steady, came from somewhere to her left. You'll tear the stitches. Michelle turned her head slowly. He sat in a chair drawn close to the bed, a book forgotten in his lap. Tall, even seated. Dark hair slightly disheveled. Eyes the color of slate, watching her with an intensity that should have been unsettling but somehow wasn't. You're awake, he said, and something in his posture relaxed fractionally. Thank God. Where? Her voice came out rough, unused. Ravenshire House. My home. You collapsed at the Christmas fair 3 nights ago. He set the book aside, leaning forward slightly. Do you remember? Michelle closed her eyes, reaching for memories that scattered like startled birds. I remember. Snow. Cold. And then. Nothing. A void where explanation should be. She opened her eyes again, meeting his gaze directly. My name is Michelle Fraser. Jeff Coleman, Duke of Ravenshire. Your Grace. She inclined her head, an automatic gesture of propriety that felt absurdly formal given the circumstances. I appear to be in your debt. You appear to be bleeding in my guest room. The debt can wait. A ghost of humor flickered across his features. Can you tell me what happened? Who hurt you? I don't, Michelle faltered, frustration rising. I remember London. I remember taking lodgings near Clerkenwell, but the attack itself... She pressed fingers to her temple. It's simply... gone. The physician said memory loss isn't uncommon with trauma. How convenient. The words came sharper than intended. She softened her tone. Forgive me. You've shown me extraordinary kindness, and I'm responding with ingratitude. You're responding like someone who doesn't enjoy being helpless. Jeff's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. I understand the impulse. Silence settled between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. Michelle found herself studying him, the careful control in his posture, the intelligence in his gaze, the way he maintained polite distance despite having presumably saved her life. Why? She asked finally. Why bring me here instead of a hospital? You don't know me. No. Jeff stood, moving toward the window where snow fell in steady silence. But you knew me, or thought you did. You said my name before you lost consciousness. Michelle's breath caught. I did. You said you knew I'd come, and that you were sorry. He turned back to face her. So perhaps, Miss Fraser, the question isn't why I brought you here. It's why you were waiting for me. Before she could answer, before she could even process the implications, Mrs. Holloway bustled through the door with a tea tray, shattering the charged moment. Jeff stepped back immediately, propriety reasserting itself. But as Michelle reached for the offered cup, her sleeve slipped back, revealing her wrist. Jeff's gaze caught on something there, a thin, silvered scar running along the base of her palm. The kind of mark left by a blade caught bare-handed. The kind of scar that spoke of violence, survival, and a past far darker than anything a respectable woman should possess. Their eyes met across the room, and Michelle knew with sinking certainty that the Duke of Ravenshire had just glimpsed the truth she couldn't remember, but couldn't escape. She was dangerous, and somehow, impossibly, she'd brought that danger straight to his door. The snowstorm arrived on Christmas morning like divine intervention, or conspiracy. Jeff woke to find Ravenshire House buried under 2 feet of fresh powder, the roads impassable, the world reduced to white silence. Mrs. Holloway declared travel impossible for at least 3 days. The physician couldn't return. No carriages could depart. Michelle Fraser would remain his guest, whether propriety approved or not. "I'm sorry," she said when he brought the news to her room, now dressed in one of his sister's borrowed gowns, deep blue wool that made her dark eyes luminous. "I seem determined to disrupt your life at every turn." "My life," Jeff replied dryly, "could use some disruption." It became their private joke over the days that followed. Christmas Day passed in unexpected quiet. Michelle insisted on leaving her sickbed despite Mrs. Holloway's protests, moving carefully but independently to the library, where fire crackled and snow pressed against the windows like a cocoon. Jeff found himself reading aloud, Byron, then Wordsworth, while she listened with the focused attention of someone starved for intellectual engagement. "You don't read like a duke," she observed during a pause. "How does a duke read?" "With appropriate gravitas and minimal emotional investment." Her lips quirked. "You actually seem to enjoy the poetry." "A character flaw, I'm told." "By whom?" "My late wife, primarily." The words escaped before Jeff could stop them. He stiffened, expecting the usual awkward sympathy. Instead, Michelle simply nodded. Was she wrong about many things, or just that? The question surprised him into honesty. "Most things, as it turned out, including her assessment of our marriage." "Ah," Michelle traced the embroidered arm of her chair. "So you've built walls not out of temperament, but experience. Is that what you think I've done? Your Grace, you've constructed an entire fortress." But her tone held understanding, not judgment. "The question is whether you're keeping the world out or yourself in." No one had spoken to him with such directness in years. It should have been impertinent. Instead, it felt like oxygen. The days blurred together. They played chess. Michelle won twice, to Jeff's genuine surprise. She played piano with skill that spoke of expensive education and recent practice. They debated philosophy, politics, the merits of Gothic novels versus classical literature. She challenged every assumption he presented, not with hostility, but with sharp intelligence that forced him to defend positions he'd held unexamined for years. "You think duty and desire must be enemies," she said on the 3rd evening, snowflakes still falling beyond the frost-etched windows. "Experience suggests they usually are. Or perhaps you've simply been doing your duty to the wrong things." Michelle's gaze held his across the chessboard. "Obligation without joy isn't noble, Your Grace." Jeff's hand froze above his bishop. "You speak from experience." "Don't we all?" Something flickered behind her eyes. Pain, memory, regret. "We build our prisons carefully, stone by stone, then wonder why we feel trapped." The firelight caught the curve of her throat, the elegant line of her jaw. Jeff realized with uncomfortable clarity that somewhere between Byron and chess, between philosophy and snowfall, he'd stopped seeing her as an obligation. He was seeing her as possibility. "Michelle," he said quietly, using her name for the first time. She looked up, and the air between them shifted, charged, intimate, terrifying. Outside, snow continued its silent siege. Inside, Jeff Coleman felt something crack open in his chest that he'd thought long dead. Hope. Dangerous, foolish, utterly undeniable hope. The scream tore through Ravenshire House at 2:30 in the morning. Jeff was out of bed before conscious thought, taking the stairs 3 at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. He burst through Michelle's door to find her upright in bed, eyes wide and unseeing, hands clawing at the sheets as though fighting off an invisible attacker. "No, please, I didn't mean—" Her voice broke on a sob. So much visible injuries. "Michelle." Jeff crossed to her in 3 strides, catching her shoulders gently. "You're safe. You're at Desire, Ravenshire House. Look at me." She jerked away from his touch, still trapped in whatever horror played behind her eyes. "He has passed away. Oh God, he has passed away, and I took his life." "Michelle." Firmer now. Jeff cupped her face, forcing her gaze to his. "Breathe. You're dreaming. Come back." Her eyes focused slowly, recognition bleeding through the panic. She sagged forward, and Jeff caught her instinctively, one hand cradling the back of her head as violent tremors racked her frame. "I remember," she whispered against his shoulder. "God help me, I remember." Jeff held her until the shaking subsided, until her breathing steadied, until she pulled back with the careful composure of someone reassembling shattered pieces. Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway, summoned by the scream, but Jeff waved her away with a subtle gesture. This conversation required privacy. "Tell me," he said quietly. Michelle's hands twisted in her lap, white-knuckled. "There was an argument. A man. He cornered me in lodgings near Whitechapel. He knew things. About me. About documents I'd—" She faltered. "He was blackmailing me. Threatening to destroy my family if I didn't continue providing information." Jeff's blood went cold. "What kind of information?" "Political correspondence, trade negotiations. Things that should have remained confidential." Her voice dropped to barely audible. "I was part of a network, moving documents across borders. I thought—" A bitter laugh. "It doesn't matter what I thought. I was a fool." "The man who blackmailed you. What happened?" "He became violent when I refused. There was a struggle, a sharp object." Her hands rose unconsciously, mimicking the motion. "I didn't mean to. I was only trying to defend myself, but the sharp object went deep and he fell, and there was so much visible injuries." She looked up, eyes haunted. "I ran. I don't even know if he survived. I just ran until I collapsed in that square, and then—" Her voice cracked. "Then you found me." Jeff's mind raced, trying to reconcile the intelligent, compassionate woman he'd come to know with this confession of violence and espionage. This man. "Did you know his name?" Michelle went very still. "Michelle." Something in her silence sent ice down his spine. "Who was he?" "I'm sorry." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Jeff, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know the connection until just now when the memories came back." "What connection?" His hands gripped her shoulders. "Tell me his name." She met his gaze, and he saw his own devastation reflected there. "Edward Coleman," she whispered, "your half-brother." The words landed like a physical blow. Jeff released her, stumbling backward. Edward, his father's bastard son. The family shame, the man who'd nearly destroyed the Ravenshire reputation before vanishing into London's underworld 8 months ago. The man Jeff had secretly hoped has passed away. "You stabbed Edward." His voice sounded distant, hollow. You were running from Edward. I didn't know he was your brother. Not then. Not until this moment. Michelle's composure finally shattered. Please, you have to believe me. But Jeff couldn't hear her. Couldn't think past the roaring in his skull. He'd fallen in love with the woman who took his brother's life. Or tried to. God, he didn't even know which would be worse. Get out. The words came flat. Dead. Jeff, get out of my sight. Michelle flinched as though struck, but she rose with dignity despite her tears, despite the wound in her side, despite everything crumbling between them. At the door, she paused. For what it's worth, she said softly. These last 3 days were the first time in months I remembered what it felt like to be human. Then she was gone. Jeff stood alone in the darkened room, snow falling silently beyond the windows, and felt the last fragile piece of his reconstructed heart turn to ash. Dawn found Jeff in his study, a bottle of whiskey half empty on the desk, Edward's last letter spread before him like evidence at trial. Brother, if I can still claim that title, I've found employment that suits my particular talents. London's underbelly has use for men willing to trade in secrets. Don't worry. I won't sully the family name any further. I'm already passed away to you anyway. The letter was dated March, 8 months ago, before Edward vanished completely, before Michelle Fraser stumbled bleeding into Jeff's life. A soft knock interrupted his spiral into the bottom of the glass. I'm not receiving visitors. I'm not a visitor. Michelle's voice came through the door, steady despite everything. I'm a confessed criminal seeking audience with her judge. Despite himself, Jeff's mouth twitched. Even now she refused to be diminished. Enter. She did, still wearing the borrowed blue gown, dark circles beneath her eyes, suggesting she'd slept as poorly as he had. She closed the door with deliberate care and remained standing, hands clasped before her like a prisoner awaiting sentence. Tell me everything, Jeff said. From the beginning. I'll decide afterward whether to believe you. Michelle nodded once. My father was a diplomatic attaché in Paris. Minor position, major debts. When he passed away 2 years ago, he left my mother and sisters with nothing but creditors and scandal. Her voice remained clinical, factual. I had education, but no fortune. Connections, but no prospects. When a man approached me offering paid work moving diplomatic correspondence, I told myself I was being practical. You were being a spy. I was being desperate. Steel entered her tone. Women don't have the luxury of noble poverty, Your Grace. We survive by whatever means we can. Jeff poured himself another measure. Continue. The work was mostly mundane, trade documents, minor political correspondence, nothing that seemed truly dangerous until I realized what I was carrying, treaty negotiations that could shift the balance of power in Europe. By then, I was already compromised. She moved to the window, silhouette stark against the snow-bright morning. I tried to extract myself. That's when Edward found me. How did he know? He was part of the network, a broker of information, trading secrets to the highest bidder. Bitterness threaded her words. He'd been watching me for weeks, knew everything, my roots, my contacts, my family's location. He said if I stopped working, he'd ensure my mother and sisters were implicated, arrested for treason by association. Jeff's hands tightened on the glass. It sounded exactly like Edward. Cruel, calculated, cowardly. The night at the lodging house, he came to collect another package. I refused. He said... Michelle's voice wavered for the first time. He said women who forgot their place needed reminding. He had a knife. I had a letter opener. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken horrors. You don't know if he survived. No, I ran. Like a coward, I ran. Like someone fighting to live, Jeff corrected quietly. He stood, crossing to where she stood rigid by the window. Edward was my father's shame. a constant reminder of infidelity and weakness. He's tried to extort this family 3 times. I paid him off twice. The 3rd time, I told him if he ever approached Ravenshire again, I'd see him hanged. Michelle turned, surprise flickering across her features. You hated him. I pitied him, which he hated more. Jeff met her gaze squarely. But he was still my blood, and you still put a sharp object in him. Yes. No excuses. No equivocation. Just naked truth. Jeff studied her face, the intelligence, the strength, the barely concealed terror that he would condemn her. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to toll. The world outside continued, oblivious to the moral calculus being performed in this snow-locked study. I believe you, he said finally. Relief crashed across Michelle's features. Thank you, but the world won't. Jeff's voice hardened with grim certainty. If Edward lives, he'll destroy you. If he's dead, the authorities will call it murder. Either way, your confession has damned you. I know. Then why tell me? Michelle smiled sadly. Because after 3 days of pretending to be someone worth knowing, I owed you the truth, even if it costs me everything. Jeff turned away before she could see his expression crack. He'd spent 6 years building walls against exactly this, the terrible vulnerability of caring what happened to another human being. Now those walls lay in ruins, and he had no idea how to save her, or if he even could. The magistrate arrived at noon with 2 constables and a warrant bearing Edward Coleman's signature. Jeff met them in the entrance hall, blocking access with the physical authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Magistrate Harrow, this is unexpected. Your Grace. Harrow removed his snow-dusted hat with obvious discomfort. I apologize for the intrusion. We're here on urgent business regarding a Miss Michelle Fraser. We have reason to believe she's residing at Ravenshire House. Every muscle in Jeff's body went rigid. On what grounds? Attempted murder and suspected treason. Harrow produced the warrant with the reluctance of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. A formal complaint has been filed by Mr. Edward Coleman, who claims Miss Fraser stabbed him during a dispute over treasonous activities in which they were both allegedly involved. The name landed like a stone in still water. Edward is alive. Jeff's voice came out carefully neutral. Recovered sufficiently to provide testimony, yes. He's quite eager to see justice served. Harrow's expression suggested he found Edward's eagerness distasteful. Your Grace, I must ask, is Miss Fraser here? Before Jeff could answer, Michelle's voice cut through the tension. I am. She descended the stairs with the composed grace of someone walking toward execution rather than arrest. She'd changed into her own dress. The grey travelling gown now cleaned a visible injury, though the torn fabric along her ribs had been carefully mended. Her hair was pinned simply. No jewelry, no pretense. She looked devastatingly dignified. Miss Fraser, Harrow began, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of... I'm aware of the charges, Magistrate. Michelle reached the bottom of the stairs, her gaze flicking briefly to Jeff before settling on Harrow. I will accompany you willingly. There's no need for dramatics. Like hell you will. Jeff stepped forward, placing himself between Michelle and the constables. This is absurd. Edward Coleman is a known criminal, a blackmailer, and a liar. His word against hers means nothing. Your Grace, with respect, the law doesn't differentiate based on character. Harrow's tone remained apologetic but immovable. Mr. Coleman has provided evidence, correspondence, witness statements, details of their association. Miss Fraser must answer these charges formally. She was defending herself against his violence. Then she'll have opportunity to present that defense at trial. Jeff, Michelle's hand touched his arm, gentle but firm. Stop. He turned to face her, and the resignation in her eyes nearly broke him. This is the only way, she said quietly. If I run, I confirm guilt. If I fight, I drag you into scandal. This way, at least, there's a chance for truth. Truth? Jeff's laugh came harsh. Bitter. You think Edward trades in truth. He'll twist every word, manipulate every fact until you're hanged for defending yourself against his crimes. Perhaps, she smiled, sad and knowing. But I won't compound survival with cowardice. Not anymore. Harrow cleared his throat uncomfortably. Miss Fraser, if you're ready. A moment, please. Michelle turned fully toward her. Jeff, ignoring the audience of constables and magistrate. Thank you for the sanctuary, for believing me when you had every reason not to, for reminding me what it feels like to be seen as human rather than instrument. Michelle. And for what it's worth, she continued, voice dropping to barely audible. I meant what I said. These days with you were the first time in years I remembered who I used to be, who I might have been in a different life. Jeff's hands clenched at his sides, every instinct screaming to physically prevent this, to lock the doors, to damn propriety and law and consequence. But Michelle's eyes held a plea more powerful than any argument. Let me do this with dignity. This isn't over, he said, the words a vow rather than comfort. No, Michelle agreed softly. But perhaps it's the ending we both deserve. The constables moved forward. One produced iron shackles, unnecessary, cruel theater, but Michelle extended her wrists without resistance. The metal clicked shut with terrible finality. Jeff watched them lead her toward the door, snow swirling beyond the threshold, and felt something fundamental tear inside his chest. Love wasn't enough. Honor wasn't enough. All his power, his title, his carefully reconstructed life, none of it mattered against the machinery of law wielded by a vindictive bastard with nothing left to lose. The door closed. Michelle was gone, and Jeff Coleman stood alone in his entrance hall, fists trembling with impotent rage, understanding at last the true cost of caring. Jeff reached the magistrate's holding house as the first grey light of dawn broke over London. He'd spent the night in motion, calling in favours, consulting solicitors, pulling every thread of influence his title afforded. By morning, he'd assembled a defence that should have been formidable. Character witnesses, legal precedents, documented evidence of Edward's criminal history. It wouldn't be enough. The system was designed to protect men like Edward while devouring women like Michelle. Jeff knew this with cold certainty, which is why he'd come with a different solution entirely. The guard recognized him immediately, stepping aside with wide-eyed deference. Your Grace, visiting hours don't begin until now. Jeff pressed a sovereign into the man's palm. 5 minutes. Alone. Money, apparently, spoke louder than protocol. Michelle sat in a sparse cell, still wearing her grey dress, now wrinkled from a night on the narrow cot. She looked up as Jeff entered, surprise flashing across her exhausted features before settling into something more guarded. You shouldn't be here, she said. The scandal, damn the scandal. Jeff closed the cell door behind him, suddenly aware of how little time he had, how much needed saying. I'm here to offer you a choice. Jeff, marry me. The words landed in the cold cell like an explosion. Michelle went absolutely still. Before you refuse, Jeff continued rapidly, understand what I'm offering. Not escape, not erasure of guilt or consequence. A partnership. My name becomes your legal protection. As Duchess of Ravenshire, you cannot be tried without proceedings that would require evidence Edward doesn't possess. You'd have resources, legal representation, the full weight of the Coleman family behind you. You'd tie yourself to a confessed criminal to save me from the consequences of my own actions. Michelle's voice came soft, wondering, aching. Why? Because I love you. Simple, direct, irrevocable. Michelle's breath caught. Jeff, I don't care what you've done. I don't care what you were. I care about who you are. Intelligent, brave, uncompromising in your honesty, even when it costs you everything. He moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. I spent 6 years building walls to protect myself from ever feeling this vulnerable again. Then you collapsed into my life bleeding and impossible to ignore, and every defense I'd constructed became irrelevant. Tears spilled down Michelle's cheeks. I love you too. God help me. I do. Hope flared in Jeff's chest. Then say yes. No. The word struck like a blade. Michelle, I won't let you do this. She stood, moving to where he stood, close enough that he could see the resolve in her tear-bright eyes. I won't let love become another form of erasure. If I hide behind your title, I'm still running, still letting fear dictate my choices. This isn't fear. It's survival. It's both. She smiled sadly. And for once in my life, I need to choose something other than survival. I need to face what I've done, who I've been, and let truth matter more than outcome. Truth won't save you from the gallows. No, but it might save me from becoming someone I can't live with. Michelle reached up, cupping his face with surprising tenderness. You gave me back my humanity, Jeff. Don't ask me to surrender it for safety. I'm asking you to live. His voice cracked. Damn your principles if they mean I lose you. You never had me to lose. She rose on her toes, pressing a kiss to his cheek. Brief, achingly gentle. But you gave me something more valuable. You reminded me I was worth fighting for, even if the fight is against myself. In the distance, church bells began to toll. Dawn had fully arrived. The guard's footsteps approached down the corridor. This is goodbye, Michelle whispered. No. Jeff caught her hand, pressing it to his chest where his heart hammered. This is me refusing to accept your martyrdom. I will fight for you whether you permit it or not. Then fight knowing I love you. She pulled away gently but inexorably. And that sometimes love means letting someone choose their own ending. The cell door opened. Michelle walked toward it with her head high, shoulders straight, every inch the woman who'd challenged him over chess and poetry and the nature of duty. Jeff watched her go. Bells, ringing across London like a requiem, and understood that loving her had changed him irrevocably, even if it couldn't save her, even if she wouldn't let it. The carriage came for Michelle at 8 o'clock on Christmas morning. Jeff stood at the window of his study, watching as they led her down the magistrate's steps toward the black lacquered vehicle that would carry her to Newgate Prison. Snow had stopped falling sometime during the night, leaving London wrapped in pristine white that would turn to grey slush by afternoon. A temporary beauty, already surrendering to inevitability. She didn't look back. He hadn't expected her to. Michelle Fraser wasn't the sort of woman who dealt in theatrical gestures or false hope. She'd made her choice with clear eyes and an unflinching heart, and now she would face whatever came with the same terrible dignity. It didn't make watching any easier. The carriage disappeared around the corner, taking her toward a fate Jeff couldn't control, couldn't prevent, couldn't fix no matter how many solicitors he hired or favors he called in. For a man accustomed to wielding power as naturally as breathing, the helplessness was its own form of violence. Behind him, the door opened quietly. Mrs. Holloway entered with tea he hadn't requested, setting the tray down with the gentle firmness of someone who'd decided he needed tending whether he wanted it or not. She's a brave one, the housekeeper said softly. Foolish, perhaps, but brave. Bravery won't save her from Edward's testimony. No, but it might save her from becoming what he is. Mrs. Holloway moved to stand beside him at the window. You love her. It wasn't a question. Yes. And she refused your help. She refused to let love erase consequence, as though the two were mutually exclusive. Jeff's hands clenched against the window frame, as though choosing truth over survival made her somehow more worthy. Perhaps it does. To her, at least. Mrs. Holloway studied his profile with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd known him since childhood. You've changed, Your Grace, these past days. She changed you. Into what? A man who can't protect the woman he loves? Into a man capable of loving at all. The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Jeff thought of Michelle's voice in the firelight, challenging his assumptions about duty and desire, of her fingers closing around his in unconscious trust, of the way she'd looked at him in that cell, not with accusation or resentment, but with gratitude that he'd seen her as human rather than criminal. She asked me to fight for her, he said quietly. Even after refusing my help, she asked me to fight. Then perhaps, Mrs. Holloway suggested gently, that's exactly what you should do. Below in the street, Christmas morning continued its quiet unfolding. Families emerging from homes, church bells calling the faithful to service, the ordinary rituals of celebration, carrying on, oblivious to one woman's extraordinary choice. Jeff turned from the window, something hardening in his chest, not walls rebuilding, but resolve crystallizing. Michelle had chosen truth over safety, consequence over escape. She'd walked toward her fate with dignity because she believed it was the only way to remain herself. But she'd also asked him to fight, and Jeff Coleman, Duke of Ravenshire, had spent 6 years letting fear and betrayal dictate his choices. He'd built a life of careful distance, of emotional control, of safety purchased at the cost of genuine connection. Then a bleeding stranger whispered his name in the snow and shattered every defense he'd constructed. Love hadn't saved them, but perhaps, it had given them both something more important, the courage to become people worth saving. Jeff moved to his desk, pulling out fresh paper and ink. There were letters to write, evidence to gather, legal strategies to explore. Edward's accusations were built on lies and manipulation, and lies could be dismantled by someone with resources, determination, and nothing left to lose. Outside, snow began falling again, soft, persistent, covering yesterday's tracks with new possibility. Michelle had chosen her path. Now Jeff would choose his. Not because he could guarantee her freedom, not because he knew how this would end, but because she'd reminded him of a fundamental truth he'd forgotten somewhere between his wife's betrayal and his self-imposed exile. Love wasn't about control or certainty or protecting yourself from pain. It was about showing up, about fighting, about choosing someone else's worth even when the world conspired to deny it. Michelle Fraser had walked toward the gallows rather than compromise her principles. The least Jeff Coleman could do was fight like hell to ensure she'd live to regret it. Christmas morning dawned cold and quiet over London. But in a snow-locked study, a duke who'd sworn never to let emotion override reason bent over his desk and began to write. And for the first time in 6 years, felt something remarkably close to hope. Dear listeners, thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, comment, and share it with someone close to you. Your support inspires us to keep creating stories filled with love, healing, and unforgettable twists.